अग्निर्ज्योतिरः शुक्लः षण्मासा उत्तरायणम् तत्र प्रयाता गच्छन्ति ब्रह्मविदो जनाः.
Knowers of Brahman who depart in fire, light, daytime, the bright fortnight, the 6 months of the northern path of the sun, go to Brahman. Now see, the moment Brahman comes, some people are well on their way to deep sleep. But what you need to understand is basically this, that we've spoken of desire and attachment. It is these two things, desire and attachment, that imprison you, that put you into a prison. Thereafter, it doesn't matter what the quality of the desire is. That's what he's talking about here. As long as you're operating within the purview of a desire, you are pushing yourself into a prison of your own making. And then suffering. And then when the suffering comes, you blame everybody, including God. Except come to terms with the fact that yes, I am the one who's put myself in the prison. And therefore, I am the only one who has the power to get myself out of this prison. So what is this prison? See, if you function with bad desires, it's like getting to one of the worst prisons, what they used during the British times, they used to call Kala Pani, right? From where there is no return, you simply go there and die. That's the worst prison. So if you function with selfish desires, that's what he's been saying here, you go to hell and come back. But if you function with positive desires, it is still desire. It's like you've shifted from an ordinary prison to a 5-star prison with air conditioning and what is that called? High-def LCD TV in each room, attached bathroom, jacuzzi, what else? Entertainment, everything you've got. But you are not free to move out of that prison. How would you like to be in it? In your homes, you may not have all these facilities. But if you were offered a prison with all these facilities, how many of us would say yes? No, correct. That's exactly what he's trying to tell us. Why are you unnecessarily going into now, in the name of spiritual development, in the name of growth, in the belief that you're doing something good, all that you're doing is shifting from what is that called? Arthur Road jail to a 5-star jail. Does it make sense? And for that you have to put in so much effort. It's not easy to get rid of selfishness and acquire unselfish desires. So what he's saying is, for the same effort, if you can move out of the prison and enjoy the freedom, what Wordsworth calls as ethereal air, even if you're living in a slum, it doesn't matter, as long as you're free. That's what he's saying. That freedom comes only when you move outside the periphery of desire, which means perform karyam karma, just do what you ought to do. As we've seen earlier on one of the earlier days, there are 3 kinds of actions that you can perform. The highest, the best quality of action is called niyatam karma, means obligatory duties. Just focus on what are my obligations as a member of the family, as a citizen of this, as a resident of the city, as a citizen of the country, as a human being, so on and so forth. As long as your focus is on obligations, you're not promoting your desires, you're well on your way to getting out of this prison. For which he says, all right, you may not get to the state of realization in this janma, you may not get to realization in the next janma, but at least there is some way out. Maybe the 5th, 6th, 60th janma you may get out. But the way we are going about it, it goes on endlessly. And later he says, shashvate, it is almost eternal, whether it is positive desire or negative desire. So the second if you are not able to keep to niyatam karma, which is your obligatory duty, the next is you fall into kamya karma, then straight away prison. Then you are at the mercy of your desires. Whatever be your desire, you have to meekly succumb to that and fall a prey to that, and then go through all the trauma and suffering that follows. Desire and attachment. And you've got to be able to see that. There are people who have not been exposed to this philosophy at all. First time they hear it and immediately it goes straight in. They get it. And there are others like us who go on for years together, nothing seems to happen. It's like water off a duck's back. But that the day you wake up to this, for which you need to understand what it is, not to be victimized by your desires, not to get boxed in. See, the problem with the prison is the moment you enter a prison, over a period of time, that becomes your whole universe, that becomes your world. And you lose sight, you forget about what goes on outside that prison. And then you get involved, you get enmeshed, you get entangled in the happenings of the prison. And then all that matters to you is what food am I getting, how much food am I getting, and how many times are my relatives allowed to visit me, and maximum, an intellectual prisoner thinks in terms of how many books are there in the library. But beyond that, you can't think. An outstanding person in the prison is one who sets aside all of this and fixes his attention on the fact that it is my birthright to get out of this prison. And he commits himself to moving out of that prison. Then he devises a method. He says, how do I get out of the prison? The moment his attention shifts to freedom, to that extent, he becomes unconcerned with the happenings in the prison. So if you're eating food and another prisoner, bully, comes and takes away your food, you say, what difference does it make? What matters is, how do I conduct myself in such a way that I get out of this wretched place as quickly as possible? And such a person has a complete, automatically he assumes the leadership qualities. He becomes a leader of all the prisoners in the prison. And this is all that he's saying. See, because if you take a look, if you read this and take it literally, it doesn't make sense. There's nothing in it that is verifiable. Fire, light, daytime, bright fortnight, 6 months of the northern, the knowers of Brahman who depart go to Brahman. But what he means is, see, if you take a look at all the words that he's used here, fire, light, daytime, bright fortnight, 6 months of the northern path of the sun, what is common between all these words? Light. Light is equated to knowledge. So, here he is talking about the path of non-return, what the Upanishad calls as Devayana or Uttarayana, which means there are people who have this concept of getting out of the prison. Now, from now on till the end of this, we are going to take a look at the prison because that's the only way of understanding what's happening. So, here is a person who understands clearly that he needs to get out of the prison. But for the time being, he is in the prison. So, what can he do? He has to go through with the activities of the prison, follow the routine, interact with other prisoners, with the jailer, with the etc., the security people, so on and so forth. And while his focus is on getting out of the prison, he is not so alert, so he gets involved, he gets entangled with what's happening with the other prisoners. One prisoner falls ill, another prisoner loses his wife, a third prisoner, something or the other goes on. He gets involved in that. So what happens? Because his attention is on getting out of the prison, he manages to get free on parole, good behavior. But when he goes out, it's incredible. At the time of leaving the prison and going in, all his fellow prisoners give him a farewell party. And all of them break down crying, say, oh, how sad, I'm not going to meet you. This is it, when you get involved. But he's a good person, he gets involved in the right ways, he has good desires. So what happens to such a person? Now come back to our life. What happens to such a person whose attention is on breaking free and getting to the state of realization? But along the way, the spiritual path itself is so tantalizing, is so attractive, and is so fulfilling that he gets attached. And so he strays into the avenues of desire, positive desire, but still desire. So what happens to him after death? He says he goes to a place called Brahmaloka, where he enjoys the result of the punya that he has accumulated in this world. Once that is exhausted, he has also performed selfless, dedicated activities geared towards realization. So he has cleansed himself of all desires. Since he doesn't have any more desire, he can't come back. There's no fuel. So what happens? He moves he moves on to realization from Brahmaloka. That's what he's speaking of in this verse. Non-return. The next verse, 25, he speaks of return, and you see the words that he uses there. It's all of which indicate ignorance, darkness. So the message, now the tradition says that such a person goes to Brahmaloka, then the spiritual practitioner listens to the lectures given by Brahma, Lord Brahma in heaven, then meditates and realizes. All that is conjecture as far as we are concerned. So all that you need to understand is, don't get involved with desires. Steer clear of desire. It doesn't matter whether it's negative or positive, it is an impediment. It stands in the way of your spiritual progress. So it delays, there's an unnecessary delay in your path to realization. So what must you do? Follow the path, as Shankaracharya says, punya apunya vivarjita pantha. A path that is free from both punya and apunya, free from both desire-ridden positive actions and desire-ridden negative actions. And so if you're free from desire, now the question that arises in your mind is, all activities, the only actions that we know are those backed by desire. So we can't conceive of a state when we're free from desire. How can you act? Action comes to a halt the moment there's no desire. Isn't that true? So what is he speaking of? See, unless we understand that, we move on to the next verse when we go home and say, oh, chapter 8, a beautiful chapter. Gita is fantastic. But what to do with yourself? I don't know. Because I don't know how to move away from desire. So what he's saying is, he says, let's go back to our own experiences. Let's say, sports person, a cricketer, let's say. In order to, suppose his aim is to be selected in the Indian national team. In order to get to the national team, to build up his merit, to get to the national team, he has to do many, many other things, all of which have nothing to do directly with cricket. So maybe he has to go to the gym and build his muscles. Maybe he has to go jogging. Maybe he has to swim. Maybe he has to, what else do they do? Recently they've gone through some outdoor training near Bangalore, etc., etc. Maybe he has to do so many things. Does he have a desire for all of that? What does he have a desire for? Cricket. the national team. But in order to fulfill that desire, he has to do a whole lot of other activities for which he has no desire. He has no desire to be an Olympic swimmer. He has no desire to be a footballer. He has no desire to build his muscles. He has no desire to do any of that. But he has to do this in order to achieve his goal. Similarly, now I'll come back to the spiritual field. A person who fixes his attention on getting out of this prison, on getting to realization, or even if you can't think of realization, spiritual evolution. You can't get there by sitting here and meditating. You can't get there by sitting there and saying, oh, realization. You have to follow the spiritual practices, which means you have to work in a spirit of service and sacrifice. You have to develop love, universal love. You have to develop the power of the intellect, so on and so forth. All of these, you understand, are only means to an end. However attractive they may be, however fulfilling they may be, they are still a part of the world. And where I want to get is beyond the world. So since the desire is for realization, which is beyond the world, as far as the world is concerned, you have no desires whatsoever. You're not interested. Get back to the prison. Whenever a prisoner has focused his attention on getting outside the prison, to the extent that gets fortified, that desire gets fortified. With reference to the prison, he is indifferent, he is unconcerned, he couldn't care less what happens in the prison. So whatever happens in the prison, he relates it to how does this help me to get outside the prison. If it helps him, he is interested in it. If it doesn't help him, he couldn't care less. So this is how you perform obligatory duties, desireless actions. Because you have a desire for getting outside this prison of the world. And that desire needs to be nurtured, it needs to be nourished, it doesn't come naturally to you, it is there. But in the flood of material desires, it gets completely, it goes to the back burner. And so, right from childhood in this country, along with other things were not neglected. Remember, this country is the country that gave the best, it came up with a concept of zero. It contributed all kinds of scientific, medical, astronomy, physics, etc. to the world. But alongside that, they never forgot this spiritual aspect. And this spiritual aspect then made everything meaningful. But if you lose track of the spiritual, which we are in danger of doing now, we may achieve the best. Like today, everyone is bullish on India and saying, oh, great growth rates, economy is doing well, this, that, and the other. Economy may do well, but how are we doing spiritually is the question. As long as we do well spiritually, the rest will follow. Worldly achievements will follow. But when you do well financially, it doesn't necessarily follow that it is spiritual. So you need to make an effort and nurture it, cultivate this spiritual thirst, desire in each one of us. And then it blossoms. Sometime, your business is just to sow the seed. Sometime in the life of the person, it will blossom. It has to. But if you don't plant the seed at all, if you don't give exposure to your children, to your family members, to your employees, then it's a great loss because you're not helping them to grow to their full potential. So, punya, apunya, vivarjita pantha. Move away from all desires, good and bad. Next verse.